Hello everyone, this is part 21 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto made sure to wipe the trickle of blood that escaped his mouth before he slid the door to the hospital room open. He walked in slowly, peeking his head around to make sure it was the right room before shutting it behind him with a small click. Tayuya was already there, sitting in the chair next to the bed while she watched over Fu's sleeping body. Naruto wasn't sure why she was there. She and Fu only really talked once, but he wasn't complaining. Naruto walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. Tayuya didn't flinch from the contact, having heard Naruto enter the room. "Do you know how she is?" Tayuya just nodded, her eyes still on Fu's meekly smiling face. "Yeah, some prick of a doctor was marveling at how fast she was recovering, so I booted him out, making too much fucking fuss over it anyway." Naruto resisted the urge to laugh at the way Tayuya put it. He knew Fu would be alright, she was tougher than she looked and Chome wouldn't let anything too bad happen to her. Tayuya looked up at him, smirking slightly at his concerned expression. "You know she's so much like you already." Naruto raised an eyebrow but allowed her to finish. "I've only ever seen you be that selfless." She looked down a little sadly. "Honestly, I never thought I would see somebody act that way for you." Naruto just leant down and planted a quick and chaste kiss on Tayuya's cheek, causing the girl to blush. "You know you still owe me for running out to fight that bastard and leaving me like that." Naruto's grin grew as the tension in the air lifted slightly. "Please Onisan, not in my room." Naruto's head whipped around to see Fu gently open her eyes, wincing at the light from the sun streaming in through the blinds. Naruto took the hint and walked over to the window, pulling them tighter, which earned him an appreciative smile. He came back over and propped himself on the side of the bed so that he could wrap an arm around Fu's shoulders. "Hey Imuoto, how are you feeling?" The girl smiled weakly and chuckled a bit, almost bringing on a coughing fit, but she suppressed it. "Like I just spent a day with Yugito-sensei." Naruto joined in on her laugh while Tayuya just sat to the side, slightly confused as she was left out of the loop. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he suddenly remembered why he had come here and quickly began rooting around in one of the pouches hidden in his coat. "Oh Fu, I almost forgot." He came back up, clutching something in both hands which obscured it from view. Quote, "I was going to give you this after Gaara officially made you a shinobi, but I guess you earned it a little sooner." He opened his hands, smiling warmly as Fu's eyes watered a little. In his open palms was a long strip of dark blue cloth and attached to it was a single metal plate, lovingly engraved with the kanji for 7. Fu took it almost reverently, her eyes still watering but still not quite ready to cry yet. "Huh, I guess I should have given it to you sooner." He reached up with a chuckle and gently touched the bandage around Fu's forehead, taking his hand away when she winced. "But I guess better late than," he was interrupted as Fu rocked forward, capturing her older brother in a hug that made both of them wince from their recent injuries. They broke apart when Tayuya coughed loudly into her hand, startling both of them out of the moment. "Sorry to interrupt, but that's my job." Both Fu and Naruto smiled sheepishly as they rubbed the backs of their heads respectively, oblivious that they were perfectly emulating one another. Tayuya just groaned and put her head in her hands. "Oh great, there are two of them now." She sighed and smiled as she walked around the bed, capturing Naruto in an equally warm embrace. The blonde gladly returned it, happy to be holding his girlfriend close, even if she was pressing on a still sore burn. This time the hug was broken by Fu coughing into her own palm, which Tayuya promptly ignored and continued anyway, sticking out a tongue in the mint-haired girl's direction. "Hey." Tayuya smiled smugly and only clutched Naruto tighter, eliciting a small wince. "Sorry Fu, girlfriends before sisters." She laughed but pouted when Naruto firmly but gently pushed her off him. "Sorry, I think I've had all the hugs I can manage today." He backed up the statement by clutching his side rather painfully but smiling all the same. "Ah, well isn't that a shame, you just look so adorable right now." All three occupants of the room turned to see a smirking Matsuri standing at the door of the room with Gaara just to her side. He coughed into his hand awkwardly, not used to seeing his two friends so close, even though he had suspected it long before it actually happened. "I hope we aren't interrupting anything." Naruto just adopted his classic pose, his cheeks only slightly tinged red. No, of course not. What do you need, Gaara? The young Kazekage sighed but nodded anyway, walking further into the room and sitting in a chair near the bed. Tayuya, I think it's time you told us everything you found about the Akatsuki. Sasori is dead, so you remaining undercover has become pointless. After tonight I know we need all the help we can get if we want to just stay alive. He looked around the room, making sure to look into Fu, Tayuya, and Naruto's faces one at a time. From this point on nobody is to engage an Akatsuki member in combat alone. None of us are ready or able. He received a round of nods to his approval and took a deep breath. Okay Tayuya, tell us everything you know. When she was done the room was bathed in an unsettling silence. While the news that the members of the elusive organization were tough was expected, it didn't lighten the blow. Everybody was left to their own thoughts in order to think about what challenges they would be facing in the future. Naruto seemed especially pensive as his mind ran through all the information he had been given. His eyes were narrowed in concentration and the veritable cogs in his brain were turning furiously in order to come up with plans and strategies. Information was power, and knowing your enemy proved almost invaluable in a conflict. However, at no point could they assume their information was complete. They would always have to be prepared for the unexpected. Naruto knew that the Akatsuki must know almost as much about him as surely as he did about them now. Luckily, from what Tayuya told them, they had been dealt a crippling blow with the loss of Sasori. Their spy network would take months to recover completely. The way he saw it, the next major target would be Kakazu, the money behind the organization. Without those two key players, the Akatsuki would be severely weakened, maybe not as much ability-wise but more generally, which in many ways was more important. Ideally, they would simply want to kill every last member to make sure that there is nobody left to resurrect the organization from whatever ashes they left behind. That meant taking on the leader, the Enigma, the one that nobody had any information about. To get to him, they would first have to get through Konan, the woman with some kind of bloodline that allowed her to control paper like Gaara could sand. She was the one partnered with the leader, she would have the information they needed. Unfortunately, to get to her they had to first go through the other members. Naruto just sighed into his palm. He was a 16-year-old boy. This kind of responsibility didn't belong on his shoulders. However, he would bear it as long as there was breath in his body and he could protect the people close to him. Well, there's no use antagonizing over it, we might as well just get on with our lives. Everybody stared at the blonde incredulously except for Gaara, who nodded impassively. What are you talking about, shithead? Did those Akatsuki fuckers rattle a few bolts loose in that brick you call a head? Don't you understand how serious all of this is? Naruto turned to her with a small smile that made her stop mid-rant. There was no anger there, a hint of tiredness maybe, but otherwise just a serene calm. Of course I do, Tayuya-chan, I'm taking this as seriously as I can. I'm just saying there is no use in going after them. Sooner or later they will have to come to us. Tayuya seemed like she wanted to refute that, to say they should be out there hunting them down before they could strike first, but Naruto's eye kept her from speaking. Gaara can't just up and leave, he has a village to run and a fiancé to look after. Matsuri pouted a little at the implication she needed looking after, but one look at Gaara and she re-evaluated just who would be protecting whom if it came to a fight. We also need to warn the other Jinchuriki if we can. If they were here tonight, then for all we know they're already going after the others. Sure, we got a few of them, but there are still 8 more S-ranked shinobi who could kill any one of us if they got us alone. Tayuya nodded meekly. She was a proud kunoichi, but she wasn't arrogant. She had seen firsthand what Sasori and Deodara could do, and they were powerful. Deodara was even the lowest member besides Toby, everybody else was even more dangerous. So for now we just carry on. We train, we prepare, but we wait for them to come to us. We wait until the fight is on our terms. We need every advantage we can get. By the end of his small speech his voice was a whisper and he wasn't meeting any of the others in the eye. Tayuya hugged his arm lightly and he offered a small smile as her vibrant hair fell against his shoulder. You're right, sorry Naruto. His eyes opened wider a bit at the admittance but softened as he just rubbed her back reassuringly. Powerful words, Naruto, perhaps you would have been better suited for Kazekage. Gaara said it with a small smirk, so Naruto knew he wasn't serious, but he grinned back all the same. Who needs a title like Kage, stuck behind a desk all day? I'm still going to be a legendary shinobi and no asshole in a black cloak is going to stop me. Tayuya actually felt a bit of pride swell in her chest as she heard her boyfriend call the Akatsuki members that. For the first time she felt as though she was rubbing off on him instead of the other way around, and it made her feel good, special even. Yes, well, on your line of thinking, I have in fact sent word to Kumogakure that the Akatsuki have made their move. Perhaps it would be wise to go and check on them soon to make sure they are okay. While I have confidence in Reikage Dono's ability as well as those of his Jinchuriki, caution is recommendable in situations like these. Naruto nodded. It would be good to see Yugito and B anyway. You're right, Gaara, but first there's something I have to do. Quote. He turned, smiling at Tayuya as he rubbed away the hair on her neck to reveal the tritomo mark that still lay there, a promise I made a long time ago. Tayuya whimpered a little as his finger traced over the sensitive flesh, but it wasn't noticeable enough for anybody but Naruto to see. So I need to make a little stop in Konoha along the way. Gaara and Fu raised their brow at his declaration while Matsuri just seemed rather caught up in the moment. Konoha. Naruto nodded confidently. That's right. I need to speak with Sasuke Uchiha. I would ask you stay a few days, at least. You have only just returned. I'm sure there are a few people you would like to visit or say hello to. Naruto looked at his friend for a moment, thinking about his words as they walked down the corridor together. Tayuya and Matsuri had gone off somewhere, the redhead looking slightly more reluctant than her giggling companion. As you said, you are in no rush. The Akatsuki will find you when they will, assuming they even know about the deaths of their companions. Naruto nodded with his face twisted into a small frown. We shouldn't start underestimating him now. The Zetsu Tayuya talked about is supposed to be almost as good a spy as Sasori's organization. Gaara nodded, knowing this already but offering just the smallest glimmer of hope in an otherwise rather bleak time. Fine, but the point remains the same. Konoha is only 2 days away at best. You can leave in a few days. It will be good to catch up anyway. Naruto smiled warmly, nodding back at his friends as they continued through the empty mansion. Speaking of which, Naruto's smile quickly formed into a smirk. Matsuri, what's the story there? If Gaara hadn't been wearing his sand armor, Naruto would have been able to see his blush spread across his pale face. Yes, well, that's a long story. Naruto's smirk only grew. Well, I am staying for a few days. Gaara eyed him with an irritated look before it softened and he chuckled. Yes, well, I walked into that one, didn't I? Naruto just grinned cheerfully. Where do I begin? He looked down on thought before a small but genuine smile spread across his face. Really, I guess it started when we first met at the academy. Naruto looked at him in confusion and Gaara quickly clarified. Not while we were there, later, after you left for your training trip. Her class was in their last year and I was coming to check in on everything to get used to my role at the time. Temari had expressed an interest in teaching, so naturally Kankuro tried it as well, however he quickly grew bored with it when none of the students appreciated his puppetry. Naruto laughed, imagining Kankuro getting the cold shoulder from Genin younger than he was. I watched over them as they split the class into groups to begin weapons training. As a joke, Temari offered me up as one of the sensei. He looked away, just the barest hints of sadness evident in his pupilless eyes. At the time I was still new as the Kazekage, people still thought of me as I was before, in fact they seemed to get worse for a while when you left. Naruto also looked pained and placed a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. That's behind me now, I am the Kazekage and people respect me for it, I see it every day when I walk down the streets. Naruto smiled softly as Gaara returned to his normal self again, repressing the memories of a worse time. Anyway, many of the students took what Temari said literally, but still nobody wanted me as a sensei. I was still the weapon, the dangerous boy the parents warned them from. Naruto felt a pang of sadness again, wondering how bad things would have been if he and Gaara had never found each other. However, Matsuri stepped forward. Later she told me it was because she was curious, mostly about my god but also because she saw something in me. He smiled again. To this day she won't tell me what, but nevertheless she stepped forward. Back then she was so against using weapons. Her mother was killed in the last war and she never quite got over it. I tried to explain that a weapon was something used only to protect those you care about. He smiled as he looked up. Something you taught me, in fact. Naruto returned the smile as they carried on through the corridors. In fact, it took me getting kidnapped to actually get over my fear of weapons. Tayuya looked at the girl curiously, Matsuri may have been a year younger than her, but she showed a remarkable maturity for a girl of 15. I was used as bait. A group sought him out to test his status as the ultimate weapon against their own. As his student, they thought I would be the best bait to draw him out of the village. Tayuya nodded, having heard Gaara speak of something like that offhand on the day she came back. He saved me, of course, fighting off everybody who kidnapped me. He even got me over my fear of weapons. She looked down quietly, but I still wouldn't want to kill somebody with them. Tayuya nodded despite not really understanding where the girl is coming from. She had no inhibitions against killing as long as it was for the right reasons, like protecting people she cared about or fulfilling the mission. Even so, she respected Matsuri in a way for at least sticking to her beliefs. She had heard of Anbu members who had gone their entire careers without a kill. After that, everything sort of went back to normal for a while, like nothing had ever happened at all. Gaara continued to train me whenever he could. I understood he was busy as the Kazekage, but he always found time. Whenever I asked how he could do it, he always told me just to thank Naruto for some reason. Tayuya smirked a little at the inside joke while Matsuri looked at her confusedly before turning back to the corridor. I always respected Gaara. Without my mother around, I was never really told to stay away from him, but I was shy and the other children were so afraid of him. She looked down sadly. I guess I caved a little to peer pressure, but I still respected him, and Naruto, for what they held inside of them and what they had to endure. I don't even know when it turned into something more. We spent a lot of time together, so I suppose it was only natural. Tayuya smiled at that. Yeah, I can understand that. Matsuri smirked suggestively but didn't pry. Tayuya's love of privacy was well known to everybody around her at the academy. I still remember when he first asked her out to dinner. I was a nervous wreck. Usually I would ask you for support in situation like those, or maybe Tayuya for some advice. Instead I had to go to Kankuro. That was a mistake I won't be repeating. Naruto just laughed, wiping a tear from his eyes. Kankuro spent just a little too much time around puppets. The line between flesh and wood blurred a bit after so much dedication. He was hardly the person to go to concerning advice about women. He told me to take her somewhere fancy and expensive. It just became awkward because neither of us knew what to say. Eventually we left, still not having said a word to each other until we reached her house. He smiled, looking wistfully out of a window they passed as if he could see the spot from the vantage point. I was about to turn and leave when she planted a small kiss on my cheek. His small smile turned into something akin to a grin for Gaara. She had to spit the sand out of her mouth as I apologized, profusely. Naruto imagined the scene and his laughter only increased. She asked if she could do it again without the sand armor, and ever since then our relationship has only improved. Naruto nodded happily. He was genuinely glad that Gaara had found someone in the way he had found Tayuya, at least after he had finally realized just what she meant to him. Then, a year and a half later, he proposed. It was the most romantic day of my life. A small blush covered her face as she looked down with a small smirk. And the most romantic night. Tayuya blushed a little as well at the implication. It couldn't have been more perfect. He took me up to the top of the walls where he had prepared a picnic for us. Tayuya raised an eyebrow at that. A picnic didn't really sound like Gaara's thing. He must have asked Temari. Then he raised a dome of sand over us so that the moon acted like a floodlight on just the two of us, like the rest of the world didn't exist. Her face softened as it turned nostalgic before returning to its usual mischievous smile, and then of course there was the ring. She coughed and raised her hand up nonchalantly, but in a manner that obviously showed of the gleaming gem adorning her finger. The large diamond was set on a band of gold that looked like two intertwining ribbons that swirled in intricate spirals and patterns that were almost dizzying to follow. Tayuya was never one for jewelry, but even she had to admit it was a beautiful ring. Plus, the sex is amazing. Naruto lazed in the comfy chair, idly spinning a kunai on the tip of his finger. He was beginning to see the benefit of the tri-pronged design. They were perfect for close combat because they could be used to disarm opponents, and they were heavier than a normal kunai. That little fact also meant it could travel further through the air when thrown, which made them perfect for the primary purpose. They were slightly less aerodynamic, which took a toll on their accuracy, but the Hiraishin and Fujin no Iki didn't really require that much accuracy. So how did you get Temari to agree to set that whole picnic thing up anyway? It's not like her to help someone out for free, even her brother. Gaara continued to look out the window, idly musing on something as a few shadow clones moved about the office, tidying and sorting documents. She asked to be put in charge of the Chunin exams this year. She didn't say why and I didn't ask. Naruto just nodded. He would ask his fellow blonde Suna shinobi later anyway. Wait, aren't they in Konoha this time? Gaara just nodded. How did you know? Naruto shrugged with a smile. I had to keep aware of news while I was gone, in case there were any good training opportunities. Gaara took a deep breath, signifying that he had heard Naruto but didn't look away from the window. Strange, you told me a lot about your time in Kumogakure, and even your stint in the Land of Water, but you haven't spoken much of the second year of your training. Naruto shrugged idly, still focused on the kunai in his hand as he tried to add another to a second finger. Me and Fu moved around a lot, didn't really stay in the same place for longer than a month. We got jobs where we could for money, helped a couple folks out, even got a place in a movie at one point. Gaara raised an eyebrow but still didn't turn. Let's see, restored a princess to her throne and overthrew a tyrant. We went to a country to the south of the elemental nations where they don't use chakra but this weird green rock thing. Had a brief stint in prison if you'd believe it, a technicality mostly but it all worked out. Met another swordsman of the mist, beat him and took his swords. He grinned as he patted a seal on his side. Oh, and I visited Hoshigakure. Fu made a few friends before we had to leave because of some instability. We did end up overthrowing the Hoshikage though, weird village that won. As he spoke he seemed to count off the events on his fingers, his eyes roaming around as he tried to think of anything else the two of them did after leaving Mei and her rebels. After that we went back to Kiri for a while to see how it was going. The war was over by then and the rebels were still celebrating. I almost regret not staying to help them out but I guess it all worked out in the end. Mei's the new Mizukage which is cool. Gaara just nodded, the information wasn't new to him and he had already sent envoys to Mei for talks of an alliance. Iwa wouldn't like all the other countries being in an alliance they wanted no part in and was currently vying with Suna for the rights to a treaty. Now that Gaara knew Naruto had a personal connection to the new Mizukage he could possibly use that in his favor. It was slightly manipulative but sometimes he had to put the village first, his role as Kazekage was clear to him. Then after that we went back to Kumo for a bit to let B and Yugito know how our training was going before we came back here. Gaara nodded, taking all of this in. It was obviously a hurried and abridged version but he could ask about his adventures in more depth later. It sounds eventful. Naruto just nodded happily. Yeah, made a lot of friends. His smile turned into a small frown as he looked down at the finely carpeted floor, lost a lot of good friends too. Gaara finally turned from his position at the window, looking at Naruto with sadness. It comes as part of the job Naruto, you should know that. The blonde nodded tiredly and looked up with a faint smile after drawing a deep breath. I know Gaara, it inspires me to train harder so I don't have to see it again. Gaara smiled, glad that Naruto was at least learning from his various hardships instead of getting lost in them like so many good shinobi did. I'm kind of tired, yesterday was pretty exhausting and I didn't get much sleep. I'll go see if Tayuya wants to go to bed yet. Gaara just nodded impassively, returning to his musings at the window as Naruto got up to leave. Hurry up Onisan, they're catching up. Naruto just huffed as he continued to hop across the tree branches, ducking low to make sure he didn't clothesline Fu on the lower ones. Of course they're catching up. He's just as fast as I am. Fu just lightly slapped him on the head, urging him on as he mentally shrugged and increased the pace slightly. He was thankful for his ungodly stamina at this point as without it he would never have made this kind of journey in a single day. Come on Onisan. I think I can see the gate. Naruto looked up and sure enough the very outline of the walls had come into view through the obscuring trees. It gave him a final spurt of energy to pick up the pace even more and barrel on through the trees. His breath was heavy and coming out in gasps now but he could nearly taste the sweet air at the end. Suddenly he felt a presence behind him as a red blur caught up to them. He tried to urge his muscles on even more but they were sluggish and unresponsive from exhaustion. The red blur overtook them just as they all burst out of the tree line, Naruto falling to the floor as the other figure finally turned around smirking down at him and Fu on his back. Naruto just groaned as he looked up, straight into his own smug whiskered face and Tayuya's above it. Sorry bud, but the original's always better than the clone. The clone that Fu straddled just grumbled some more before bursting out of existence, giving Naruto a few odd thoughts as its memories were transferred. Tayuya just smiled victoriously, cheering with both hands clasped together as she shook them above her head. Fu pouted from her position on the floor, having fallen over as the clone dispersed into smoke and landing on her ass. It's not fair, why does Tayuya get the real Yuoni-san? Naruto just shrugged while Tayuya continued to cheer to nobody in particular. Sorry Imuoto, I have to do what Tayuya says, it's part of being a boyfriend. Fu pouted again, her irresistible eyes making Naruto want to go over and console her with a hug, but Tayuya beat him to it. After hopping off his back and walking over to the younger girl, she placed a firm arm around her shoulders and whispered something in her ear. If Naruto had tried, he could have made it out, but from the way it turned Fu's face tomato red, he was glad he didn't. They walked toward the gates in silence, Fu seemingly shocked by what she was told and Tayuya smiling innocently while Naruto buried his face in his palm. He slunk back with her, leaving Fu to walk a few feet in front of them. I wish you wouldn't do that with her, she's only 13. Tayuya just looked at him with those same big innocent eyes that he swore she had stolen from Fu in the last few days. Whatever are you talking about, Naruto-kun? He just sighed and smiled weakly, at least glad she had added the suffix if only in a mocking way. Nothing, come on Tayuya-chan. He walked a bit faster, catching up with Fu as they reached the gates, pulling the two Chunin out of their semi-lucid state. They seemed familiar to him and he quickly realized that it was because they were the same two guards that had been at this post the last time he was here. He winced internally, he couldn't imagine being stuck in the same boring job for 2 years and wondered who they pissed off to get an assignment like that. Business in Konohagakure, Kotetsu said in a bored tone, not really paying attention to the new visitors as Izumo scrutinized them more closely, trying to think where he had seen the blonde and redhead before. He seemed to draw a blank but continued to look at Naruto oddly before looking at the Hokage monument that was just in view from the gate. He shook his head before returning to the book he had been reading, mumbling something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, impossible. Just visiting from Sunagakure to deliver a message from the Kazekage to the Hokage. Kotetsu just nodded languidly, there were so many messengers coming through the gates he barely even registered them anymore. Fine, sign here then. Naruto did so, it wasn't like he was lying, Gaara really did have a message of some kind for Tsunade, but he just left out that he was going to speak to her as well. They moved on, walking through the main street of the village that headed straight for the Hokage Tower. Both he and Tayuya wanted to visit Hana and Anko, but they figured it could wait until after their business was done. As they walked, all three began to notice that Naruto was getting incredulous and curious looks from a lot of the villages they walked past, especially the older ones. It began to seriously unnerve Naruto as he saw them begin to mutter under their breaths to one another, just out of his earshot, although he could catch the occasional word like, Hokage, or, fourth. Tayuya was also looking around, worrying that the people might recognize Naruto and lynch him or something. Fu seemed mainly oblivious, but she was trying to ignore the people anyway, not particularly fond of lots of people she didn't know. There was a mutual sigh of relief between them as they reached the tower, closing the door on the suspicious and whispering crowds outside. Well, that was fucking weird, what was their problem? Neither Fu nor Naruto could answer her, so they moved up their stairs in silence, pondering what this meant for Naruto now he was back in the village. It took a few minutes to verify the authenticity of the letter from Gaara before they were let in, so they had to sit on a couch outside the Hokage's office. Do you think they recognize me? Tayuya shook her head slowly, thinking about the question herself. It can't be. You've been gone for 10 years, there's no way they would remember you. They barely even noticed you the last time we were here. Naruto nodded in agreement, his presence during the Chunin exams was kept to a minimum, Sarutobi saw to that. He went back to thinking about it before the secretary motioned them all into the office. Naruto put the thoughts out of his mind for now, put a smile on his face and stepped into the office. He sweet dropped when he noticed that Tsunade was asleep at her desk, drooling over some documents like he hadn't been gone for 2 years at all. He coughed loudly, getting no response. He tried it again, even louder this time. Tsunade stirred but didn't wake up. Hey Tsunade. The woman jerked up in her chair, sending a few sheets of paper flying around the room like snow from the sky. She had a line of drool coming from the corner of her mouth and she looked particularly tired. Well, she didn't work out the shadow clone technique to paperwork, that's for sure. He waited for a moment as Tsunade got her bearings and Fu giggled quietly to herself. She found that this cage didn't intimidate her in the slightest, she was far too funny. Tsunade peered around the room groggily until her eyes rested on Naruto, opening wide in shock. She peered even closer as if she could pierce the veil of her drunken stupor just by willing it away. Naruto, said Blonde just nodded happily, grinning at the young-looking woman. What are you doing here, and when did you grow up so much? Naruto continued his smile, he enjoyed the shocked reactions people gave to his change, the raikage is still his favorite. Tayuya took that moment to practically drape herself around Naruto's neck from behind. I know, gorgeous isn't he? She said it in an obviously provocative manner, earning a raised eyebrow from Tsunade and a sigh of annoyance from Fu. The younger girl had grown to become irritated every time Tayuya would make a lewd or suggestive comment about Naruto around her. Of course the redhead was doing it purely for her own amusement to get reactions out of people, just like now as Tsunade stared across at him from behind her paperwork-ridden desk. Yes well, age changes us all doesn't it? Naruto smirked in amusement at that, it seemed rather ironic coming from the 50-something-year-old woman who didn't look a day over 20 currently. Now I assume you're here for more than just a visit. I'm sure Gaara's a busy Kazekage and can't keep sending his shinobi off on errands. Naruto just nodded and tossed her the scroll. He didn't know what was on it but he didn't really care all that much, probably some boring economical thing he wouldn't care about anyway. Really? Just a scroll? You been demoted or something? Naruto grinned sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. Nah, Gaara couldn't take away my rank if he tried. He chuckled, knowing that Gaara would never do that to him, threaten him with it maybe but never actually go through with it. We were coming this way anyway so he thought we might as well, I can move faster than most. Tsunade raised a brow, her lips tugging into a tight smirk. Yes, I heard you can even give the raikage a run for his money in the speed department. Naruto just shrugged, not wanting to tell her that he was now even faster than having beaten his highest speeds a few months ago. So where were you heading that made you so ideal a messenger? Naruto smiled sheepishly, he had hoped she wouldn't ask that. Kumogakur. Tsunade let out a small huff of a laugh in bemusement. Hardly, on the way, don't you think? Naruto shrugged but Tsunade's eyes became a bit more serious as they took in his tense posture. Naruto, why are you really here? Naruto seemed to tense even more before his whole body seemed to slump in defeat. He hadn't been sure how to broach the topic anyway and this was better than nothing. I want to see Sasuke Uchiha. Tsunade went back to having one eyebrow raised in curiosity while her eyes narrowed in suspicion. And why would you be looking to speak to one of our prisoners? Naruto's eyes widened slightly, he hadn't expected him to imprison Sasuke, at least not for this long anyway. Actually, I was hoping to examine his curse mark. There are a few tests I want to run on it, see if I can come up with a counter seal or even a way of removing it entirely. Tsunade scrutinized him, looking for any deception in his voice of face but found none. Naruto wasn't a very good liar, or at least most believed that was true. In actuality he was so good at lying that people believed that he couldn't tell a lie to save his life. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Naruto's face twisted into a small frown, he hadn't expected her to deny him. It wasn't like he was going to hurt the Uchiha much. If it's about, Tsunade raised a hand to quiet him before continuing. I can't help you because Sasuke is no longer in Konoha. Naruto closed his mouth, looking at the Hokage curiously. About a month after he was placed in the Anbu jail, a squad of Otonin led by Kabuto Yakushi infiltrated the village and took off with him. At the time he was undergoing a lot of mental and psychological evaluation with the Yamanaka clan, so he was declared a bit unstable. After that Orochimaru essentially went into hiding, we've heard barely anything from him in the past 2 years. Naruto cursed in his head, this set his plans back a lot, now he would have to take a lot more time examining Tayuya's mark, time he didn't have if Akatsuki had their way. Are you sure? Tsunade raised a hand for him to quieten down again. Listen Naruto, if you are really set on going after Sasuke, your best bet is to find Orochimaru. If I'm right then the snake bastard's plans revolve a lot around the young Uchiha. You aren't one of my ninja, but Suna and Konoha are allies, and thanks to your friend the Kazekage and all his treaties with the other nations, Konoha has never been in a bigger financial boom. That means I am allowed to let slip information every now and then, to repay the favor if you will. Rumors have it that the snake will be moving on the Sanbi. After the Mizukage and previous Jinchuriki Yagura was overthrown, it was let loose, and he is presumed dead. She leaned back from her position on the desk, her conspiratorial whisper returning to her usual voice. But aside from all that, it really is good to see you, Naruto. If you plan on staying around the village, then we should catch up. She smiled warmly and Naruto returned it while inside he was running through the information she had given him. He smirked internally. Looks like we're going back to Kirigakure. He nodded in Tsunade's direction and she nodded back, letting them know they could leave now. Outside, it didn't take long for Tayuya and Naruto to look at each other and nod with a smile before setting off at a fast pace towards Anko's apartment building. They jumped across the rooftops this time to avoid the odd and penetrating looks of the villagers. This actually improved their traveling speed and they made it across the village in only a few minutes, having to slow down a bit to let Fu catch up. She might have had stamina nearly comparable to Naruto and B, but she lacked the speed that kept them out of her league. When they arrived at the familiar green door that marked Anko's apartment and knocked, they received no reply. Tayuya knocked even harder, but again they got no reply. She just turned to Naruto and shrugged. Maybe she's on a mission. Naruto was a little downhearted. He had been looking forward to seeing Anko again, and beating her in a spar. Just as they were about to turn away, they heard the sound of the lock clicking on the other side of the door and it opened with a slow creak. Yeeg. What is it? Anko poked her head around the door, the top of a blanket evident around the bottom of her neck. She didn't look particularly healthy, her skin was a little pale and there were large bags under her eyes. From the way she spoke, she had a blocked nose and looked at any moment like she was going to be sick. Her blurry vision took a moment to focus on the new arrivals and wondered if she had begun hallucinating if the fourth Hokage was standing at her doorstep. Hi Anko-sensei. Naruto gave a cheery wave at the sickly-looking woman as she peered at him closer, obviously struggling with keeping her vision straight. En Naruto. He smiled and nodded, the action seemingly making the purple-haired woman a bit queasy as she turned a pale shade of green. What are you guys doing, Gear? She sniffed loudly, sucking back a large piece of phlegm that made all three teens cringe a little. Nobody liked being sick. Anko looked around the hallway, barely even noticing Fu as she scanned their surroundings. Well, you might as well come in. She sneezed onto her blanket before moving aside to let them in. Naruto and Tayuya were immediately hit by a wave of nostalgia from the time they spent here during their stint in Konoha. Everything was where they remembered, but there were a few more knickknacks lying about on the shelves and sofa. Anko enjoyed taking mementos from her various missions and displaying them around her apartment like little trophies. She shuffled in after them, securely wrapped up in a blanket that forced her to take small measured steps to get around. They all sat down on the couch with Anko flopping down next to them closest to the box of tissues. So Anko, what happened to you? The woman chuckled, but the action sent her into a fit of violent coughs that made Naruto shy away from her slightly. Turns out that hey, it wasn't faking it for once. Bastard sneezed on me during a mission a few days ago. Naruto and Fu couldn't really sympathize with her, being physically incapable of getting ill, but Tayuya managed to send a small comforting pat Anko's way. She hated being sick more than most, especially because Naruto couldn't. Anko just screwed up her eyes for a moment before letting out a large sneeze as she melted back into the couch, really becoming bothered with the illness. So fad are you guys doing back here? Naruto turned on the couch, carefully staying a little distance away from Anko. We were passing through and thought it would be a good idea to come and see you. Anko smiled in the way only somebody sick could do and captured Naruto in a very weak hug. Ah, well, isn't that sweet? She let him go, looking over him appraisingly, some of the old glint coming back into her eye. You know, Naruto, you got pretty hot. She smiled seductively, but it didn't quite come out that way with her pallid complexion and slightly bloodshot eyes. If Tayuya becomes too troublesome, then I'm always around. She smiled again but had to break away to blow her nose loudly. Tayuya found the scene so hilarious she couldn't even berate Anko for what she said, while Naruto just laughed nervously. Thanks Anko, I'll keep that in mind. He looked over at Tayuya apologetically while she just shrugged, looking rather indifferent to the whole thing. So how have you been? Anko finished blowing her nose, taking a peek inside the tissue, which once again made everybody cringe before she threw it in the bin with the rest of its kind. Bit of this, bit of that, made Junin. By the way, if you're going to see Hana, don't bother, she's on a mission. Naruto nodded with a smile. He was glad she was promoted, he felt as though she deserved it. She seemed to be nodding off as she spoke, her eyelids drooping as her words became slower and more drawn out. Eventually she could barely keep them open before she dropped onto the couch while the other three just looked at her dozing form incredulously. Well, that wasn't how I fucking expected it to go. Naruto could only nod in agreement. Now what? Naruto shrugged before looking back at Anko's sleeping form. He sighed and hefted her into a bridal carrying position, getting a huff from Tayuya as he carried the sleeping Junin across the apartment to her bedroom. The gentle swaying motions he made with his arms seemed to momentarily wake her up and she opened her eyes slowly, noticing she is now in her room, being carried. My Naruto, getting a bit forward aren't we? Naruto just blushed but kept moving forward, hoping Anko would fall back to sleep so she wouldn't keep embarrassing him. Sure enough, her eyelids started to droop again and she looked ready to fall back into slumber as he placed her gently underneath her purple bed sheets. It was good seeing you, Naruto. If you see Orochimaru again, kick him in the nuds for me. With that she promptly passed out, snoring softly into the pillow as a small trail of drool edged its way out of the corner of her mouth. Sure thing, Anko. He smiled at her. It would have been adorable to see the usually frightening woman so peaceful if he couldn't see the slight glint of the kunai under her pillow. He moved back out into the apartment, gently closing the door behind him. Tayuya had her arms folded across her chest, obviously annoyed at the way Naruto was with Anko. He sighed, knowing he was going to receive some form of punishment later but didn't say anything. Okay guys, we can stay here for a while or we can head out early for the land of water. Tayuya thought about it for a moment before looking out the window on the other side of the room. We might as well just go. I don't really want to keep seeing people give you those strange looks and we should catch up to the Sanbi before Orochimaru gets his hands on it somehow. Naruto nodded, acknowledging her points before turning to Fu expectantly. She seemed to want to look around the village some more but she looked across at Tayuya who seemed impatient to leave and just nodded. Naruto smiled at his girls, not that he would ever call them that out loud, and nodded with enthusiasm. Okay then, if we leave now we should be able to get to Wave by nightfall. He looked across at Fu sheepishly who just looked down embarrassedly. And hopefully this time we can actually go where we intended to go. Fu blushed and started for the door, quickly followed by Tayuya who just wanted to go. Finally Naruto gave one last look around the apartment before smiling and gently shutting the door behind him. Naruto had wanted to show Fu the view of Konoha from the Hokage monument but he thought that leaving quickly would probably be for the best. As they walked down the streets they continued to get glares of mistrust and suspicion that were beginning to drive Naruto crazy. He was tempted to turn to them and demand to know what it was they kept whispering about but he knew that would be a mistake. He needed to keep as low a profile as he could. There was no use in drawing attention to himself. Unconsciously the trio quickened their pace to the gates, mindful to stay to more out-of-the-way routes through less crowded alleyways. They reached the gates slower than they would have liked, knowing that roof hopping would have also garnered the attention of the local Anbu. He let out a small sigh of relief as he finally stepped outside the gates and what felt like the oppressive confines of Konohagakure. There wasn't much to say between the three of them as they moved through the forest, all of them too lost in their own thoughts from the brief experience in Konoha. Tayuya was staring at the back of Naruto's head, watching his spiky hair bob up and down as he leapt from tree to tree. Out of nowhere a kunai lodged itself directly in Naruto's torso, followed by a multitude of others that all made a sickening thud when they landed. Tayuya nearly cried out in shock but was smart enough to duck out of the way of the 10 or so kunai aimed in her direction. She managed a small sigh of relief as Naruto's seemingly lifeless body burst into a log, embedded with all the kunai. She ducked into a nearby clearing, what appeared to be an old abandoned training ground, overgrown with weeds and the encroaching flora of the forest. Her eyes darted around as Fu landed next to her, worrying about her big brother even though she had seen him get away with a quick substitution jutsu. Suddenly a man flew out of the tree line, or more accurately he was thrown out, and landed painfully at the center, his leg obviously injured. He tried to hobble away while Tayuya and Fu watched in morbid fascination. He was quickly halted as a very recognizable kunai shot from the direction he had been thrown from and pinned the man by his cloak to a nearby tree. Naruto jumped into view, not a scratch on his person and looking extremely angry. He had seen the kunai aimed for Tayuya and had quickly caught this man, not even bothering to play with him first. Who are you and why did you attack us? His voice was even but you could definitely hear the strain that had to use to keep the anger from infecting his words. Now that he was out of the forest he could see the man better, not that there was much to see. He wore a shapeless black cloak which covered most of his form, only leaving his sandal-clad feet on display. His face was hidden by a pristine porcelain mask which was inscribed to look like some demonized animal, almost like an Anbu operative but not quite. The man looked up at him without uttering a word, or at least his mask tilted up, the eye holes were darkened to the point that Naruto couldn't tell where his eyes were looking. Naruto knew what was about to happen as he felt the man's smirk from behind the mask but couldn't react to stop it. Everybody heard a subtle crunch before the man convulsed violently, ending up limp on the floor. Naruto sighed, knowing this was an effective strategy for withholding information, but he didn't know that many people who would actually be willing to go through with it. Sure enough, when he removed the mask to reveal an ordinary, but very pale face, he saw the hints of foam at the corners of his mouth. He cursed while looking over the mask. It was definitely Anbu issue, but the animal was all wrong. They weren't supposed to look intimidating, just help with knowing who was who considering their identities were classified. He hated poison, it made everything so inconvenient for him, now he wouldn't know why this man had even attacked them. He threw the mask down at the man in disgust, the simple porcelain object hitting the man in the face enough to make it loll to the side and his mouth to open. Naruto was about to turn around before he noticed the most peculiar thing about his tongue. It seemed to have a tattoo on it. Tayuya looked at him oddly as he bent down and steadied the man's face with his hand before opening his mouth. He grimaced as he reached in and pulled out the tongue, reaffirming his earlier observation of the black markings adorning the man's tongue. Now that he could look closer, though, it was apparent it was in fact a seal, a very high-quality one too. He could see the workings of a silencing array built in to be set off at a certain trigger word which he couldn't discern. He also saw a kill switch worked in there, well hidden beneath other such suppression and information blocking seals. In all it was like a slave collar, just without the actual collar itself, and it made Naruto wonder just what type of person would allow a seal like this to be placed on their body. Pulling out a scroll that he liked to jot down notes on, he copied out the seal, taking extra care to make sure everything was perfectly in place. He could examine it more later. Finally he stood up, just as Tayuya walked over, carefully examining the man for herself to make sure there weren't any hidden surprises for them. A ninja willing to commit suicide to save information might also carry explosive tags as a backup measure. What are you doing? Naruto just pointed down to the man where the seal was still visible on his lolling tongue. A seal. What does it do? She waited for a few more moments as Naruto finished copying out the seal in exquisite detail, using practiced and perfected brush strokes to recreate it down to the last detail. Basically it's a kill switch and a preventive measure to stop this man from speaking about certain things. From what I can tell, it's directly connected to certain nerve in his brain and would probably completely paralyze him, preventing him from talking about specific things. Tayuya winced, also wondering why anybody would have their body imprinted with such a seal, unconsciously moving her own hand to rub the one adorning her neck. Naruto caught the subtle action, preempting her thoughts before she could voice them. No, I don't think it was forced on him. This would have prevented anybody from speaking about what it was their master wanted hidden, but I could have removed it given time. No, he killed himself to protect the information. That shows loyalty to whatever the cause is. He looked down at the body again, or was. Whoever sent him knew I know Fuinjutsu. This time it wasn't a threat. This guy was probably a Chunin, but they could send out more. He sighed to himself. Now they had this to worry about on top of everything else. Come on, if we wait around here too long we won't get to wave before nightfall. Tayuya looked at him, then back at the man on the floor before looking back to Naruto and walking past him. He gave a comforting smile to Fu, whose eyes were rooted on the dead man on the floor. He walked over and placed an arm around her shoulders, bending down slightly so he was on her level. Come on Fu, we have to go now. She seemed startled, coming out of her haze and looking at him questioningly, making him sigh. He hated to take away her innocence like this, but if it meant she was alive and safe, then it was a sacrifice he was willing to make. Come on, let's go. With a smile he picked her up with one arm and slung her onto his back, grinning up at her as she settled into a more comfortable position. If we hurry then you can go see your friend Chojuro in another day. Fu smiled and gripped Naruto's shoulders a little harder, giving him the go-ahead to start running, something he gladly did. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.